Bible Church family. Welcome to the ongoing conversation about international missions at Fellowship Bible Church, where you get a front row seat to hear what God is continually doing to establish His church around the world. My name is Emma Kate, and I'm your host for today. And this is going to be one of our final episodes of 2024, and we have Jim Poole and Sarah Rosecky here with us today from the Global Missions team to kind of do a year in review. 2024 has been kind of insane, kind of crazy, and so I'm excited to be able to break it down with you guys. So thanks so much for being here.
Sure.
So yeah. Sarah, do you just really quickly want to introduce yourself so everybody who's listening knows who you are?
Sure. I'm Sarah Rosecky, and I'm the Global Missions admin for Jim and Scott, and been working here for 2.5 years.
Yeah. About to have a baby.
Yes.
Very exciting. So
Greatly appreciate what you do.
Thank you.
Yeah, really appreciate all the details and helping to keep Scott and I on track, helping to organize things. It's not a strength that he nor I share greatly. So Sarah helps keep us organized.
Yeah. And so, Jim, I want to come your way. Let's do like a breakdown of everything that happened this year, just like really like 20,000 foot view of what happened. And then Sarah, we're going to come your way and see like, what was that like for you after Jim lists off all these trips and everything. So, but Jim, let's come your way first.
Yeah. So in total, there were 15 different trips.
Wow.
That we took, and Scott and I didn't go on all those trips. Like Mike Thomas took a trip to Quito, Ecuador. Yeah. And then that also includes the youth trip to Indian Bible College. Yeah. And but total, when we consider global missions, including the Native American family camp, which we might talk a little bit more about later, there are 15 total trips.
Wow.
And that includes 20 different locations.
My gosh.
And so 5 of those trips that we took, they included multiple locations. And so so there were lots of trips and then multiple different locations that we went to. So.
I would be curious, how many hours do you think between you and Scott you spent on airplanes this year?
Oh,
I know that wasn't a statistic we thought. Probably not one you want to think of too much.
That's too many.
Yeah, too many. Too many Ethiopian airline meals.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But man, that is so much this year. And so, Sarah, what did that look like for you? Like, what is your involvement in getting Jim and Scott and Mike like ready to go? What do you do to help them?
There was a lot of visa applications, I would say, this spring. So much so that it was required embassy runs to D.C. because we couldn't send off the passports while they needed the passports. So it was a lot of trying to finagle all of the schedules of that. But it all worked out.
Right.
Yeah. Sometimes it was a little nerve-wracking if it was going to come in time, but
yeah, some of them you can do online, which helps out because you don't need to send your passport away, but some of them you do need to send your passport away. And so that was a huge help to get visas where we needed visas.
So needless to say, Sarah, I guess you're really good at filling out government forms and applications, so which is a good skill to have. So but also doing the paperwork, all of that kind of stuff. But then a lot of times, and I know this because I'm in the office, but not only are you at your desk doing these things, you also are very instrumental in getting all of the curriculum together. So kind of can you talk about what that process looks like?
Yeah. So I know you're probably going to talk about this a little later, but most of the conferences that were held over the spring and summer were studying the Knowing God curriculum. So some of them had them in their own languages and they were printed in their country, but then there were some that we would do English or the French version, and they would need to be shipped over with them, and they would bring them in boxes and stuff. So depending on how many pastors and pastors' wives we were expecting, we would have those printed here in-house at FBC and sent with them. So
yeah, and I've watched you put together. How many Knowing God books do you think you've printed and put together this year?
Probably close to 1,000.
Wow. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, but I mean, when you're going on 15 trips, 20 locations, hundreds of pastors,
Yep.
And we want to share this. So, wow, Sarah, that's incredible yeah, 1,000. That almost seems almost low for everything, but that makes sense. So. And then a little bit like some of these trips, I know for those who have been listening to the podcast, I know a lot of the trips, especially to Africa, were a part of our partnership with the Yakubus, with Equa EMS. But not all of the trips were a part of that. So give a highlight of what were some of those other trips that we did this year that weren't a part of the Africa tour.
Right, yeah. So Mike Thomas and I, in January, we went to South Texas, and we visited the Donna Church,
Okay.
which we've had a long standing relationship there with the Donna Church. And Oscar and Stella Garza goes way back. In fact, this is going way back. But one of my first mission trips with this church, which would have been in the early 90s, was to this church.
Wow.
Where Mike and I went in January. So it's always a fun place for me to go. We don't
Yeah.
go there very much anymore, but it has a special place for me in my life because it was one of the first mission trips I took with this church was where we went in January.
Okay.
So that was fun. We went through the meta-narrative with them. That's all we did for the weekend. Went through the meta-narrative. Scott went to Thailand in January, which was not part of the Africa tour, obviously. And he and Joel did a conference there with a group of Pokerin pastors. I think it was part of like the Pokerin like Baptist Association that he and Joel did a conference with. I think they taught grace and some grace principles and maybe some church planting principles, but all around grace and unpacking grace, every part of it for salvation, for the Christian life. And then we went to Pakistan in May and met with the Pakistani pastors there. This was our second organized, like formal conference that we had in Pakistan. We had gone there last year as well. And we taught through the New Man of Christ lessons in Pakistan. And then we had Native American Family Camp in June. And then everything else, I actually made a list because I knew you're going to ask all these questions today. And it was such an extensive year. Mike went to Quito.
Okay.
And he taught through the meta-narrative again over a long weekend there in Quito. And then the youth took a trip to Indian Bible College. So those are the trips that weren't part of the African group.
Gotcha. Yeah. Do you think you could recite the meta-narrative, like do the whole lesson since you've taught it so many times this year, like just randomly somebody comes up to you and you're like, yep, I can give the whole meta-narrative spiel. Have you taught it enough that it's burned in your brain at this point?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could probably do the lesson without any notes. I think so.
What about knowing God? Do you think you're there
I could almost do our overview.
Okay.
Like we broke it down into, we'd go there for 4 days.
Okay.
And so, I think it's 43 lessons. And so we broke it down into like key parts of it within those 4 days. And I could probably do the whole thing or close to the whole thing, without too many notes.
Yeah.
When you do something that many times. And it was in close, proximity.
Yeah,
it
back
was
to
really
back.
back to back to back.
Yeah.
It does kind of get ingrained in your
It'd be
mind.
fun one day. I don't think this would ever happen, but you and Scott side by side and having you like verbatim go through the lesson and see who trips up first. Doing that. That would be entertaining.
One thing about Scott, we've done this enough so many times, and we really appreciate teaching with each other and traveling with each other. Like we're just so much on the same page that he can begin a lesson, I can pick up in the middle of the same lesson, and he can finish the lesson, and it's really seamless.
Yeah.
And that works really well when we're doing what we're doing and traveling as much as we are.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And are there some lessons like when you guys go together? Because that didn't get to happen a lot this year. You guys traveled separately.
We did.
But when you guys, so I bet that was nice when you were actually able to travel together together, or
the first trip we took together this year was in May when we went to Pakistan. So we did all this traveling, and when we went to Pakistan in May was the first time we traveled all year together, but we had been traveling a ton, just not together.
Wow, I bet that was nice to finally have that together. And are there like certain lessons that you like to teach more than Scott likes to teach, Yeah,
he always kicks off the meta narrative, and that's great. He really enjoys that, and I do too. But he really enjoys that one. I really enjoy the one of creation. I enjoy that one. We combine lesson number 2 and 4, and so that creation lesson I really enjoy. I just really enjoy thinking about and talking about and teaching about how God not only created what He knew mankind would need, but what they would enjoy. And to me, that's huge, because like the three of us and all of our listeners, we enjoy a ton of stuff. And the reason that we are able to enjoy that is because of the heart of God. And God didn't just give us what He knew we would need, but what we would enjoy. So that's one of my favorites. And then I usually take God's discipleship of Abraham. I usually take that one. I really appreciate that one. And I usually take the one of Isaac sending out his servant to find a bride for, or Abraham sending out his servant to find a bride for Isaac. I usually take that one as well. And then Jesus' discipleship of Peter. Those are my 4 main ones that I take. So, and then Scott has his, and then when I traveled with Joshua and Simon, I kind of stayed to my 4, and I gave them the ones that Scott would usually take.
Oh, nice.
So
favorites.
I kept my favorites.
Well, next time Scott's on the podcast, we'll have to see what he says.
That's
his
right.
favorites are. And so then this kind of leads to the next question. What are some highlights? Like, what are some things you really, when you look back on 2024, are you excited and always going to hold with you? So I'll come your way first, Sarah, with this question.
For me, it was really cool. This is the second year in a row that my husband Mike and I have gotten to go to family camp and be a part of that. So it's cool to not just be on the planning side, but then to also get to implement it and get to meet the faces and really get to experience it. So that's really special. And this year was extra special because we were returning and seeing the people we had seen last year and just picking up on the relationships that had started last year, and just really special in that way.
Yeah, that's awesome. And for everyone listening, Family Camp is happening again. The dates are June, I don't remember, but it's June of 2025. It's on the website. So if you want to go, feel free to go ahead and apply. We can include the link for that in the description of this episode. So Jim, what would you say a highlight for you was in 2024?
There are a couple things. Number one, I don't want to forget to mention that Joel and Rachel were on home assignment or furlough this year, or part of this year. And so that's been great, just to have Joel and Rachel around. And then the Yakubus were just here, and that was just a wonderful time to have them be here. So to me, that was a couple highlights, was having people here, because we travel a lot, and it's one thing to be with our global family there, but when we're there, we're away from our family, we're away from our regular lives. So when people can come here and enter into our lives here, I really enjoyed having Joel and Rachel here and the Yakubus here. So that was a big thing for me. And then one thing that really sticks out in my mind, which actually has to do with Sarah, is in family camp that we were at family camp, and it was Sunday afternoon. You might have been on the porch that when people are coming to family camp, and they're registering, and so there are lots of people coming, and a group came, and I remember this one little girl. I don't remember her name. I'm sure you will remember her name. I don't remember her name, but you were on the deck of the house where people would come to register, and when you were at the table and when she came around the table, you and her just like went to each other and embraced in a hug. Do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. And so to me, that was a huge deal, because that was a year later, and you'd only been with that with that little girl for 4 or 5 days the year previous. And so it was such an impact for a year later for you to see her and for her to see you, and just that reunion and that embrace. That's going to be burned in my mind for a long time from this past summer.
Yeah.
And then another thing that had conversation with a lady that she realized that she didn't have to ask forgiveness in order for God to forgive her, and so that was like a major thing for her to begin to understand those types of things. So there's more stories and lots of like highlights for the year, but
well, I think that's so cool that both of yours was family camp, because that's a really unique global missions trip, because that's open to the whole church. Anyone from the church is invited to come, and so I also got to be a part of that, and watching our whole church body that came out there come together to serve, to communicate grace, to communicate God's love. It's just an incredible experience. And so, it's something that I'm very happy that our church gets to be a part of, and that God has brought us that way.
Yeah.
So, what would you say then some of like the successes of this year for global missions would be? And obviously, global missions is all following what the Holy Spirit has called you guys to do. So just being obedient to that is success. But what are some things that you're like, oh, this worked well for us this year?
Yeah. You want to speak to that at all, or do you have any thoughts?
I feel like
from your side
the
of things?
first thing that I think of is just a new tool that you guys have used in the banner of the meta narrative. I think that has been a cool addition. I don't know whose idea that was, but that they've been able to bring them, and then we've ordered extra so that they can leave them with the pastors there and stuff. And I feel like that's a really good tool, because otherwise you're having to write it on a whiteboard or somewhere and it gets erased. But this can be a tool that they can leave there, and that's just the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah, that's very true. When we first started taking that, and when we went to leave, people were like, "Hey, can I have it? Can you?" And we're like, "Sure, absolutely, no problem." So then, we've got a box of them in the office now, so that we'll just plan on wherever we go, we'll just leave it behind. And so that's been a great help. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and we mentioned it on a couple previous podcasts, I think, that we're working on revising the lessons this year.
Okay.
So I'm currently working on revising Acts.
Okay.
And so I'm in chapter 10 right now, and just going through the book of Acts again, it has been really refreshing just to see the work of God, and obviously the Holy Spirit leading people as they're dependent upon Him to share the gospel with people, and lots of people getting saved. And so as I think back through this year and all these locations that we've gone to and all the different people that we've been able to spend time with, it's just been like there's been probably a couple thousand people that we've actually been able to be, all of us combined, all the people that we're talking about. Not, Scott and I went to separate places, and add all those people together. There's several thousand people that we've been able to personally have a touch with, and not to mention all the people that they had a touch with and interaction with that we weren't personally with. There was 150, 200 people at family camp alone. So, I'm including everybody.
Right.
And so just to watch God work, and to watch the spiritual excitement, and to see God communicating spiritual truth to them spiritually. Because, we have the Holy Spirit who is communicating these things to us spiritually. And so for these several thousand people that we were actually, our global team was actually with personally, and to see them, like growing spiritually, understanding things spiritually. And I've, as I was reading through the book of Acts, looking to, in the process of revising the lessons, I mean, God was doing that same thing in terms of people getting saved for the first time. That isn't necessarily happening like I'm saying here, but they were understanding truth in a fresh way for the first time. And so that was really, really very, very, very exciting for the whole year. Everywhere we went. And then you all had a podcast or two where you read those testimonies. Is that right? I mean, you read stories of people giving testimony of their just
the impact of it.
The impact. Yeah, exactly.
So, go ahead, Sarah.
I just think it's neat, the pastors that are a part of these conferences, and they're asking you to come back, do this again. I want more people to come and hear about it, and how many of those conferences that they want repeated because of how impactful it's been.
That's right.
So obviously the format for how you guys do this, the conference itself is God's using that's very successful, and that's super exciting. And so this next question kind of goes a little bit deeper. So like, what was the personal impact? So like, what were the moments this year that were really encouraging for you? Like, how did God reveal himself through these trips, through the preparation? Sarah, I'll come your way first with that.
I think seeing like how, there's sometimes where it looked like something wasn't gonna work out, and just seeing like you and Scott like trusting, like, if we don't get our visa, like there's a reason, God maybe doesn't want us to go to this specific location, and just the step by step, like trusting in God's plan and all of it. And even though it seemed like if this doesn't work out, like this isn't going to be good, but no, just like trusting and seeing God's hand move in those situations, I think that was impactful.
Yeah, I think for me, when we went to Nigeria, we initially were going to go there and teach. Let me see if I can get this right. We initially were going to go there and teach the Knowing God lessons again, but then we decided to teach Romans and establishing the church. And so there was a bit of a pivot with that conference. And initially, I was like, I'm not sure about that. And Scott and Joshua and Simon, and we all got together and we talked about it. And I think I was actually the one that probably gave the most pushback. Like, are you sure? Or are we sure that they're, ready for Romans? Are you sure that they're ready for establishing the church? Or were we jumping ahead? Is what kind of. But as the four of us talked about it, we all got very comfortable with what God was leading us to do there in that Nigeria trip, and it was actually incredible. What God did on that Nigeria trip, where we took 4 days and we taught through Romans, and then we took a break for the weekend. We came back and then we taught through establishing the church, and so that was an amazing time. So it was about like seeing God direct us in what to teach. Is how I'm answering your question.
Okay.
And so it was because we had gone and we had done this. We kind of been doing the same thing. But then God led us in a little bit different direction to teach something different. And it was so it was just neat to see God work that way. And what to share. And then with some of my own uncertainties of it, the impact that it was, because it was of the Lord, and it was of what God wanted us to share, and how greatly it was received, and how helpful and clear it made things in people's minds.
And it's crazy again that it was the Nigeria trip, which is the one that Sarah and I read those testimonies from.
That's right.
Like, it had such a, not to say the other trips didn't have impact, because that would not be true, but it had such a profound impact on all of those people. And God was like, hey, I want you to do something different than what you were planning on it.
That's right.
I mean, God's ways is the best way, and his ways are higher than ours. And
that's right.
What a fantastic lived example of that.
Right. That's right.
So that's so awesome. That's very cool. And so, and as our listeners are hearing Jim and Sarah talk about all these different things, there are so many podcasts from this year talking about the Nigeria trip. There are those episodes that Sarah and I read, the testimonies, so many things. So I would just encourage you, if you don't remember the stories, go back and listen to them, because it's all about what God is doing, as we say, around the world to establish his church. And it's so cool that he has invited all of us to be a part of that. And so we've talked a lot, but how are ways, as we wrap up this year in review, what are some overall prayer requests to give our listeners as we close out this year? How can we be praying for our global church partners in the year to come?
Yeah, I think that one of the main things is for there to be continued spiritual hunger. And like you were there when we went to Zambia. You were there when we had the women's conference.
Yes.
I didn't mean to mention the women's conference earlier, but that was something that was new, and we had never done that before. And you got to experience the hunger of the ladies.
Yes.
These are the pastors' wives. And so just that there would be the continued hunger that is there, and we know that the Holy Spirit is continuing to teach people spiritually. Like we know that the Holy Spirit is doing that. Like that's the job.
Right.
That's the Holy Spirit's job. But I just pray that our global family would just be receptive to that, and would be open to continually being taught and fed by the Holy Spirit, because that's what he wants to do. And so the ladies that you were with, that we left, and that they would be continuing to have an interest in the lessons, and that they would be continuing to read the lessons, and that to read the scriptures, and to be trusting God to teach them. So that's a main thing for me, is that God would be just spiritually continuing to create a hunger and an interest in our global partners, in our global family, to continue to learn. Main one for me.
Sarah, I don't know, in your communication with any of our global church partners, or even curriculum prep, are there any prayer requests that you think are important?
I would say the family camp, it's starting to really ramp up again, and just prep for that. Building the team for next year, and it comes quickly. June seems so far off, but
that's right.
There's a lot of details and a lot of planning that goes into it. So just for that, for the team that God's going to put together, and just the families that are going to be coming from the First Nations churches, and
And you mentioned the curriculum. There's a lot of translation going on with the curriculum. And so that's another area that we can be praying, because of all the trips this year. A lot of the lessons need to be translated into the various local languages. And so that's a big job. And then that the people that are translating it, that the content of the message will be clear as they're making that translation and working on the translation, and to give them perseverance. And I've actually never done translation work, but it's tedious. It takes a lot of work, and so that they would just stay with it in the translation, and that's another big prayer request for all the translation work that's going on.
Gotcha. Absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much for being here, and for kind of doing a really, 20,000-foot view of the entire year. Again, there's so much more we could talk about. But I encourage everybody, go listen to the previous podcast. If you've missed any, I would encourage you to catch up. And then We're only going to do one more podcast in 2024, and then we'll take a break, but we'll be back in 2025, and that'll be looking ahead. What is coming in 2025 based off the year we had in 2024? We'll see where God is leading global missions and what that's going to look like, and it's going to be really, really exciting. So as always, if you want to learn more about our global church partners, make sure you check out the mission stairwell right next to the North Main entrance. And each month, global missions partner is highlighted. And this month, in November, we are highlighting Michael and Bernadette Boone from Zambia. And so in the stairwell, you can find info sheets about them, as well as prayer requests, and there are activities for the kids as well. So thank you all so much for watching and listening, and remember that it is Christ who is continually building his church until we all attain to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God.